All right, please join me in welcoming our three guests, Mr. Adam Davidson, Miao Wang, and Morgan Spurlock. Please join me. Well, greetings to those who are here at the Apple Store Soho and also those who are tuning in on this Apple iTunes podcast. Morgan, I'm going to ask you to start. And we saw from the trailer a little bit of a teaser of what some of the films look like, but maybe you could give us a little bit of background. How did this project, where did We the Economy come from? 20 short films about the economy. Where did
it started with a phone call from Vulcan Productions. They heard we were developing a movie about money that was going to explain, how money has value, how does it shift from country to country, what makes it fluctuate the way it does, and Carol Tomko, who runs Paul Allen's Vulcan Productions. Vulcan Productions is, Paul Allen, co-founder of Microsoft company.
He knows a little bit about money.
He knows a little bit about money. He has a whole lot of it. And so she said, Paul's really fascinated with the economy and wants to create something that will demystify the economy. And I said, we should get together immediately. And like 2 days later, they were sitting in my office in New York. We were brainstorming for about, an hour and a half, 2 hours. And out of that conversation came this idea of We the Economy, 20 short films you can't afford to miss. And the reason we kind of pushed towards this is a couple years ago, we did a project with GE called GE Focus Forward, where we got 30 A-list filmmakers, very successful filmmakers to come, doc filmmakers, all documentary filmmakers at that point, to come in and do short films, 3-minute films that GE paid for, but GE didn't put any branding in. We weren't like hawking GE product. They just basically said, we want people to understand that there are people doing innovative things out in the world. And so we made these films about incredible people who were kind of changing the world through their inventions, through their ideas, through what they were doing in medicine, in architecture, you name it. And so that was so successful. Like that program was seen, we had 75 million unique views for that within less than 12 months, which was enormous. And I said, there's a great way to create the same thing here with the economy and do it in a smart, funny way. Bring in nonfiction filmmakers, fiction filmmakers as well as nonfiction filmmakers. And when we started calling the filmmakers, the response was overwhelming. Everybody wanted to do it.
We certainly know you as a filmmaker, Morgan. We also know you as that guy we see on CNN all the time. So you make television.
Yeah.
I think it's worth hearing a little bit more about this company that you've created to create other forms of entertainment, in this case, short-form content. Tell us about Cinelon and how it sort of fits into your overall, sort of worldview of making entertainment, but also why that format is important.
Yes,
those two parts.
Yeah, the whole idea of Cinelon came from a friend of mine. I was out at a bar one night and met a guy named David Wales. David Wales, who is a futurist. Yes, there are people out there who actually are futurists. They are from the future. If you look at him, he looks like he dresses from the future. He is from like a time that we don't know. And but he's brilliant. He's an incredible guy, and companies pay him to help him predict trends. Like what is the future going to have? What's going to happen in a year, 2 years, 5 years? He's got a company called Ministry of Culture, and he's brilliant. And so he said, he goes, I wanted to meet you for so long. He goes, I've got a great idea. He goes, in the future, things are just going to get shorter. People are going to want to see shorter and shorter things. And he goes, and I love documentaries. He goes, I want to create a company called Documentaries, where it's like a 1-minute documentary film or a short-form documentary film. I said, that's a great idea. Nobody will be able to spell that. I said, people are going to be like, document. They're going to try 5 or 6 times. They're going to get pissed off, and then they're just going to stop. I said, so we got to come up with a better name. So we came up with the name of Cinelon as a company that would create kind of short-form documentaries. And originally, it was the idea we were going to take existing pieces of docs that were already out in the world and kind of meta tag them to news stories. A lot of what what the New York Times Op Docs is doing right now with original docs. And then we kind of started pushing towards this idea of doing original docs with great doc filmmakers and kind of keeping that kind of short form, what's called quote unquote kind of snackable content. And the
works great on things like this,
which is great on things like this, which is great on your computer. It's great at work when you have a break. It's great on your tablet. And when we created Cinelon, which now is like 4 or 5 years ago, this was kind of the perfect length. A lot of people weren't watching extended length programming, and to this day, short form content still continues to be a huge time suck for most of us, because we'll sit down and you watch one. If you like, the GE Focus Forward thing was amazing, because we saw that if you watched one film, then you watched 5 films. And the same thing is happening with We the Economy. If you watch one, the chances are you'll end up watching 3 or 4 automatically. And the next thing you know, it's been 20 minutes, and you're like, oh my God, I got to get back to work. But the whole goal behind Cinelon was to create short-form content where we could work with brilliant content creators like Miao, and smart people like Adam, and potentially brands or companies or studios or whoever, to create a very different kind of platform viewing experience.
We're going to go deeper into what We the Economy is. We're going to see clips from some of the films. Before we go any further, We the Economy, we're thrilled to have it preview at the New York Film Festival this year at Lincoln Center, and then we, a couple of weeks later, were there to help bring it out into the world, and it was in theaters all around the country.
That's right.
But We the Economy, these 20 films are actually available now.
Everywhere.
People can watch them right now. People that are in this audience or tuning in on this podcast can watch them on various or any of the devices you mentioned.
They're on the iTunes right now if you're listening. If you're listening, you can see them on the iTunes. We got people who would never... Usually if you're putting something out, people say, are they putting it out or who has it? And we told them up front, we're giving it to everyone. We want everyone to put this out. And one of the reasons why people agreed to that was, I'm a real believer in co-opetition. Like, there are times when we should compete with one another.
How do you spell that?
It's C-O-O-P. Tition. Co-op. Tition.
Easier to spell than documented.
I think they're both just as difficult. So, but I believe there are times when we should be competing with one another as filmmakers or as business owners, and there's times where you can come together because ideas are bigger and better than you versus me. There is a we idea behind it, and that's what I think is driving We the Economy. And so we got places like Netflix and Yahoo and Hulu and AOL and iTunes and everybody to agree to put this up. This was the first short film ever Netflix had put on Netflix, which is incredible. You went on your television when they launched on In Demand, and they were on the In Demand channel right below movies. Here was like the row of all these things you could watch for free. I mean, it was amazing that we got so many people to say yes. And one of the reasons, apart from it being important, was we weren't chasing a return on investment. We weren't really chasing an ROI. Like, from day one, we said, we're going to give them to you. We're giving them away to the public for free, which is also kind of unheard of. Most people want to, make money. It's film We the Economy that doesn't really make a lot of economic sense, but from the standpoint that we wanted to make an impact rather than make money was the big idea.
Well, hopefully the fact that you've partnered with a relatively wealthy individual helps with the cost side of it.
That's right. Well, and Paul was willing to underwrite the whole thing. That was the awesome part of the project. Is we had a patron who said we should be talking about these things, and this is the same guy who now has given $100 million of his own money to fight Ebola. I mean, he's a remarkable guy.
Well, okay. So speaking to the importance of this economic issue, now I'm going to go to Adam, who is listed up here as an economic advisor. Is that what it says up there still? Adam, maybe you can contextualize this for us from your vantage point. Morgan spoke to the ability to make these films, to get them out on all these platforms all at once, the importance of people coming together for this issue and not competing but cooperating, co-opetition, what was that word? From your vantage point, why is it important that we be talking about this issue now in the way that we are? The dialogue that these films start, why is it crucial that we be having this conversation right now?
Yeah, well, I think the financial crisis certainly brought in stark relief a fact that was clear for quite a while, which is the average person, certainly in America today, really needs to understand the economy more deeply than they do. And I don't think that that's too controversial a thing to say, that if you look at the bulk of the 20th century, the economy was, aside from the Great Depression and the occasional minor recession, it was a remarkable period of continuous growth for most of the 20th century. And for much of that, the growth was widely shared among people of every level. And so I think that, in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, it wasn't... You didn't need to know economics to have a good career, to have aspirations about your children. The economy was broadly working for you. And I think for a whole host of reasons, we've had a bunch of major shocks, global trade, technology, certainly the financial crisis, that has made it clear to everybody that the economy is this very potent force that is impacting their lives all the time. And I think for most people, the language of economics is very confusing. The concepts are not easy to grasp, yet it's very clear that it's a force that's changing their life, limiting their choices sometimes. And so I think helping a very broad public engage this topic, I mean, there's no more important issue right now.
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned the word economy, and for anybody who didn't go on to a career like yours, people like myself, maybe those in the audience, maybe creative people, economy class in college was it's a little bit boring, it's a little bit intimidating, it's kind of scary.
I dropped it after 2 weeks.
Yeah. So with that in mind, I mean, not to diminish at all your expertise, because it the intimidation of it all, it can be a bit daunting for people, and it can, when you think about the term economy, you sort of flash back to this idea of being in college and, oh my God, I can't go there. What kind of advice, what kind of thinking, what kind of conversations did you have with Morgan and others about how to make this topic rich, relevant, topical, engaging, not boring, how do you make a big topic like the economy interesting, I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, and I mean, it's my life's work. I grew up in all artist housing in Greenwich Village and West Beth, and I was not raised to know much about economics. It was this boring, silly topic that no one I knew cared about. Everyone I knew were artists. And I grew up and learned relatively late in life that economics is fascinating, exciting, dramatic. It is a great way to understand human passion and other things. And so I'd say the bulk of my career has been trying to share that with other people. Like someone today actually told me I'm economics for poets. That's my thing. So I created NPR's Planet Money and have written for the New York Times Magazine and others, and always with the same idea of trying to, first of all, translate it so that it's intelligible to people who don't know the boring technical words, but also in a way that conveys the passion and excitement that I feel. Although this project really brings it all to a much higher level. I think the idea of, I generally reach NPR and New York Times audiences who are, many of them don't know that much about economics, but we sort of assume they probably have a college degree, they're curious about the world, they're engaged in public policy to some degree or other. And so we're able to be a bit geekier, a bit more boring, although we try very hard not to be boring. Morgan was talking about, let's get everybody. Let's make this 100% entertaining, 100% engaging, but also really intelligent and substantive. And that was tough. So I co-wrote 2 of the films, and then I was an economic advisor on a bunch of the other ones. And it just is hard. It's really, really hard. It just takes a lot of work between very creative directors and writers. And there were 10 of us economic advisors. Sometimes it felt like we were just there to make it more boring, to kill the jokes. And the most exciting moments were when somehow the 2 things came together, where we were able to combine economic substance with a really creative idea and bring that to the audience in a great way.
Well, what I want to do is I want to watch a clip, but then I want to bring Miao into the conversation. So why don't we start by taking a look at our first clip that we have queued up, and then we'll talk with Miao, and we'll talk about her film, and then we'll come back and talk about the film that you were consulting on. One of them you consulted on. And we'll watch that as well in a few minutes. So we'll start by taking a look at a film. Morgan, do you want to set up what Caveonomics is?
Sure. So the conversation, my film's called Caveonomics, and the idea was they wanted to explain kind of how the economy came to be. And I was having a conversation with John Steele Gordon, who's a fantastic economic historian, very smart guy, who you will see in the film with me. And he's a brilliant economic historian who, when I started saying, I was like, how do you even begin to tell people this story? How do you set this up? And he goes, I have this vision. And he goes, and it didn't happen. He goes, but this is what I am. Like, if you want to tell somebody, he's like, I see 2 cavemen. And he goes, and there's 2 cavemen, and they've gone hunting, and one of them's a really great hunter. And he's got 2 wild boars with him that he's gotten. And he goes, and the other one is a terrible hunter. And he's got nothing, but he makes really great spears. And he goes, he tells his friend Ugg, he's like, Ugg, my wife's gonna kill me. I'm coming home. I didn't get anything again. She's gonna be so mad. Everybody's gonna be unhappy. And he's like, but Glug, you make much better spears than I do. If I traded you one of my boars for one of your spears, then I'll be an even better hunter. I'll get more boars next time, and your wife won't be mad at you. And I was like, that's a great idea. That should be the start of the film. And so out of that came this film that we made called Caveonomics, where we imagined like the economic system being born in caveman times, using kind of how the economic system works, how it grew into mass production, et cetera. And it was fantastic. And you'll see John Steele Gordon dressed as a caveman, which is probably my proudest moment, along with Adam Davidson also dressed as a caveman, my second proudest moment.
So we're not going to watch the whole film. You'll have to watch that on any of the number of platforms, including iTunes, that Morgan mentioned. But let's take a look at a clip from Caveonomics by Morgan Spurlock. Definitely a teaser.
Definitely, it's a very, very quick.
The film is a lot longer than that.
A lot longer than that.
And there's
the
dialogue.
film's actually about 4 to 5 minutes, and we also, Judah Friedlander, from 30 Rock's in there. And the amazing thing when you watch these films is the people that we got to kind of be in the movies, like Patton Oswalt's in one of the films, Sarah Silverman, Maya Rudolph. It's just the list is. Werner Herzog makes one of the greatest appearances you'll ever see in your life in a movie called Lemonade Wars. It's great.
Well, I want to switch gears and talk to Miao about a film called Made by China in America, and to find out from you, well, first of all, where the idea for this particular story that you told came from, and then we'll talk about your background as well.
So my topic was how Chinese economic boom has impacted the U.S. economy, and I wanted to tell, everybody knows about like the Made in China and how cheap labor in China and that's taken our jobs away. So I was looking at that and doing research, and I came upon, actually was reading some economic publications and came upon this paper about just Chinese manufacturing, actually some of it coming to the U.S. and investing in the U.S. And that just immediately grabbed me because it just turns everything around, and it's not really something that most people know about yet. And I looked further into it, and there were a couple of factories I looked at in South Carolina, and decided to focus on South Carolina just because it's not New York or California, somewhere, different. And we went down to South Carolina and just wanted to, look at how these factories are, how the Chinese are investing in these factories, and how the people that are there, really it's like a human story of these people who have been impacted and their very livelihood had been taken away, and now it's actually coming back. So
what we learn in your film, and again, they're all short films, just a few minutes long, but what we learn in your film is really surprising, I think, for many people, or at least for me. You go in with certain expectations,
right,
of sort of how one views the relationship between America and China, and what surprised you, or what did you learn in the process of making the movie that you might want to share with the audience here as a bit of a teaser, and then we'll take a look at, again, a few frames from it. But
Well, just that aspect of Chinese, the Chinese economic boom has actually developed to an extent where it's kind of gone past that 1.0 version, and now it's actually the wages and everything is rising so much in China, and then with other factors involved, it's actually in some way, some places, a little cheaper for them to come and invest here. So that was really new to me, and just like the way that swings around was surprising to me.
how did you, as jumping off of that, Morgan, how did you decide? I sort of imagine a whiteboard and sort of all these tentacles, going off in different directions as you were mapping out the aspects of the economy you would explore. But how did you drill down? And I'm sure you could have made 50 films about the economy.
No, that's exactly. When we first started, when we come up with the idea, we realized that we needed people much smarter than filmmakers to kind of decide what they were going to make. And so that's when we brought on Adam and 9 other economic advisors who, and these were people who come from, creating policy in D.C. or, writing textbooks for schools or teaching at universities. We wanted to make sure it was an incredibly diverse group of, right, left, wherever you came from, that there were basically common core ideas behind what drives the economy. And so we had them basically say, if we were going to tell 20 stories, or like what would be the 20 things that we have to hit on? And we had each person kind of say, here are the most important things that we want you to do. And out of those lists that they all created were the commonalities that we then said, these are all the things we need to make movies about. What are the questions we need to ask? Like, what causes inequality? What's the difference between the deficit and the Fed? What is money? Asking each of these questions. And then we basically took that list of 20 questions, presented it to filmmakers, and it was first come, first serve. We let everybody, whoever said yes first, got to pick their movie first and go from there.
Well, to that point, then, I want to ask Adam, how do political persuasions, political viewpoints interlock with our ability to understand or not understand the economy, and how do you advise these filmmakers to either address or not address politics? Because for some people, you sort of view policy and politics as so interwoven with how we understand or view the economy.
Yeah, and it was a challenge. I'd say it's safe to say this was a bunch of filmmakers. They were broadly of the left, maybe even the far left. Although I would say almost all of them had minimal to no knowledge about economics. It just wasn't a topic that they had really engaged before. And so I found that a lot of the early conversations were helping them understand that they were on a spectrum, that I think, and I know this from my own childhood in Greenwich Village, that if you live in an arts world, just like if you live, I know a lot of people in South Carolina where it's the same, but on the other side, if you live in an arts world in New York, everyone you know is quite left. Everyone you know is very skeptical of capitalism and has a bundle of assumptions, and you don't necessarily know that you're making assumptions. You just think, oh, this is how the world works. I'm just describing how the world works. The rich take from the poor, or whatever it is. And just like in other communities, it's different. So part of the brief for these films was to be as nonpartisan as possible. I think there's a general understanding that that's actually impossible, that economics and partisanship are very linked, particularly right now, but to make them as nonpartisan as possible. So one thing I wanted to do, we weren't there to tell filmmakers, no, you're wrong, minimum wage should be higher or lower or whatever, but to help them make creative choices, informed creative choices. So if you think trade is always bad for all Americans, help them understand why trade is a more complex bundle of the trade benefits a lot of people, hurts other people, etc. I'd say that was the main first thrust, and then generally familiarizing people with the broad sweep of here's what economists know or think they know, here's what they don't know, here's the areas of doubt broadly. And then it really got into the micro level of just looking at scripts and saying, I wouldn't put it that way because that, using that language. I remember there's one about healthcare, and there's just a bunch of words in there that I knew would just really piss off the right, needlessly. It wasn't needed for the script. So I just said, just change this word, change that word. Just there's no reason to pick a fight that you don't have to pick.
So is that your way? Are you saying that then? It sounds like you're saying that the language we use to talk about the economy today is part of what's inflaming the conversation, or how we view it? Are we talking about it in the wrong way oftentimes?
I think that, yeah, I used to be a Middle East correspondent, and if you're talking about the Arab-Israeli or Palestinian-Israeli conflict, just the nouns you use kind of tells you who you are. Like if someone talks about occupied Palestine, I have a sense of where they're coming from, and if they say the biblical lands of Judea and Samaria, I have a sense of where they're coming from. So just the words they use already is signaling an awful lot. And that's definitely true in economics. For example, Inequality, which was the film I co-wrote, that just talking about inequality right now is a broadly left of center, there's debate between kind of the center left and the more left, but there really isn't a big discussion on the right about inequality. So just talking about inequality at all is already somewhat partisan. And then it just coming up like in the film. I'm trying to remember what the actual words were, but if you talk about, there's a way of talking about healthcare. I think to economists, America doesn't have a free market healthcare system, and it doesn't have a government healthcare system. It's some kind of an ugly mishmash of both, and that's probably why we hate it so much. But the film, I think, was positing like we have a free market healthcare system, and maybe we should have more of a government healthcare system. And I was trying to say like you're using terms from a fight that actually neither side is right about. And helping them understand that. But yes, I think I think it's actually weird because I think economists themselves probably have broad agreement on a lot of issues. If you filled a room with Republican and Democratic economists on a lot of basic issues, they would probably be very close to each other. But the partisanship is so ugly right now and so heated that there's these time bombs, which I know because as a reporter at NPR and the New York Times, I've stepped on a bunch of those bombs and gotten set off exciting Twitter storms and stuff like that. So I was trying to warn people away from those things.
I want to go back to Miao's film, and then we're going to watch a little teaser as well. But tell us about some of the things that you encountered, learned, discovered in relation to some of the things that Adam was just talking about in your travels to South Carolina and investigating what was happening with Chinese companies investing in American companies or investing in America. How did you navigate? Because you're theoretically going to a place that probably was very conservative. Tell me about how you thought about it going in and how you thought about it coming out.
Yeah. Well, I decided right away that I should have an interviewer for the street interviews. That's not me.
Why was that?
Well, I am going to South Carolina, so I didn't want to be like the Chinese face coming up to, because we did a few street interviews just on, literally walking up to people on the street, just being like, can we talk to you? And so I didn't feel like if it was me going up to them, I would get maybe the same response. So I did actually I recruited a local white lady. So, and yeah, that was one of the ways I felt like going in. That was just to kind of take away that potential layer of distraction, and but then all the actual interviews with the characters that we did find, and all those were just with me. So, but so that was just because I'd never been to South Carolina before myself, and I was a little bit like, well, but it was actually quite interesting because when we were talking to all the people on the street, because in the beginning we would ask people, what do you think about the U.S. economy, and it's pretty uniform, like, well, it was kind of going downhill, and they're taking all our jobs away. It's all sort of like that kind of answers, but then in the end, we would ask, well, what would you think if some Chinese companies are coming here to invest in, some factories and actually bring jobs here? And the answers were all actually like positive. Like, well, yeah, actually that would be great. If they're coming here and providing jobs to us, then sure. So that kind of response was a little surprising to me.
Well, let's take a look at a clip from your film. I think it's going to be an equally short teaser, but let's just take a look at a few images from that, and we'll come back and then we'll talk about Adam's film as well. So we're going to... All right. I'm glad I've been reminded that there's an app for We the Economy, and I'm assuming, and I think I know this for a fact, is actually available in the iTunes store.
Yes, it is.
In the App Store.
What a shocker.
So, and there's Wi-Fi here, so you could actually download it.
You could download it and play with it right now while we're talking about it.
I encourage you to do that.
Yeah,
but
and it's free.
And so we're going to take a look at a little bit of a demo once you've downloaded it. This is a bit of what you're going to see. Braden, are you going to walk us through it, or are you just going to show us...
Yeah, sure. I mean,
Joining us is Braden King, who basically worked with the team to design the app. He's a brilliant New York filmmaker and an incredible storyteller who not only makes great movies, but also does these phenomenal digital storytelling applications. And so when we knew we were moving forward with this, I said I know exactly who to call, and that's when we brought on that bearded genius marathon running guy down at the end.
Thanks, Morgan. And I think I was drawn to exactly what these guys were speaking about earlier in terms of what Cinelon's doing with short form storytelling and looking at different ways to tell stories was really one of the things that drew me in as a filmmaker into working as like creative director on the digital aspects of this project. So what you're looking at now is a screenshot of the iPhone app, which you can download for free right now, and this contains all the films, and it's constantly updated with additional content that I'll talk about a little bit in a second. The way I approached this was really similar to the way a filmmaker might approach a film. I put together a team that included some guys here in New York that have a company called Version Industries that work with me on the website, and a company called HipCheck out of Phoenix, Arizona, that's worked with me on different art projects to put this app together. And we really approached it almost like a multimedia coffee table books. And one of the challenges here was to bring all this amazing content together and give it kind of a bed on which to sit that would give it additional context and connections. So when you go into the burger menu here, there's things you might expect, like grids of the directors and advisors that worked on the film that you can explore and also use to jump out to the individual films. Going back here is the advisor menu. And then when you do dive into an individual film, not only did we want to provide with sort of like a world-class viewing environment that would work on the phone, both in as you're holding it vertically, but obviously if you go horizontally, you get the full screen. This is all airplayable. All the films can be downloaded. It's sort of, as I mentioned, we really were operating from the standpoint of like, how do we collect all this together, put it in a useful form that people can carry with them, that teachers might be able to use in a classroom context, and give it additional information. So underneath here, you see, again, the director bio. There's an interactive quiz that also acts as a kind of polling mechanism. When you give your answer, it sort of shows you the way other people have answered the question and gives us feedback on other things we might want to bring attention to within a given topic. They're interactive, both infographics and graphs that people can explore in order to further get into the info that any given film is talking about, as well as, this is kind of neat. This is James Shamus' film about money. What we're doing is scraping real-time tweets and bringing them into the app every time you open a given film to kind of show what the conversation that's going out in the world and where that's at any given moment. And those are replaced, as I said, every time you open the app. And, for me, this, I think, was really an opportunity, again, to both explore different ways of storytelling, figure out a way to give all these films context for someone who's interested in kind of the future of how these stories are going to be told. To be able to work on pulling this all together was really interesting. And finally, I would just say that as a filmmaker, it was extremely pleasurable to work on things. Working on the little details here almost felt like editing. If you see the little drop shadow underneath here when you slide that up and forth, things like back and forth, there was a lot of attention paid to the craft in the same way that you might pay of craft of the app, craft of the website, in the same way that a filmmaker might to the edit of their film. And it was a total pleasure to bring all this together and work with all these amazing, talented filmmakers on it. Please download the app and tell all your friends about it. Thanks.
Thank you, Braden. Adam, I was thinking about this this morning as I was thinking about We the Economy as also a bit of a time capsule. Like the idea that, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, the ability for someone or for us to go back and look at these films and at the content around these films and really get a sense of the kind of questions we were asking. I mean, we'll have the benefit of hindsight at that point, and we'll sort of we'll be in a place of some sort. And the ability to kind of look back and see the kinds of questions that we were all asking each other, or the kind of subjects we were exploring at this particular moment, is particularly invaluable. And you get that in a film. You certainly get that, when I go back and look at Super Size Me, it takes you back to a particular moment, right? But in this case, you're seeing this issue explored from so many different vantage points, and in a deeper way than you can get just by watching the news or even reading an article in a newspaper or in a magazine.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I find it always fun to go back in time and see what people were fixated on. So I've been reading a lot about in the early 1900s when we were switching from an agrarian economy to an industrial economy, and the fixations and worries. And some were, amazingly prescient, and some were amazingly off base. And I think probably Morgan, you'll be way off base, and some of the others will be prescient. We'll see. Yeah. I think that'll be really interesting to see, because I'd say one of the key things for me about economics is it is dynamic. I mean, a few years ago, it seemed like just a fixed fact that China was just going to soak up more and more and more jobs. But it's dynamic. China soaks up so many jobs, wages rise. China can't soak up as many jobs anymore. Just like Japan once was terrifying, and then turned into just a solid, boring trading partner like Canada or something. And so it will be interesting. Is inequality is that just with us for the rest of our lives, or is that this short little obsession we have at this moment in history? That'll be very interesting.
Well, to that end, before we watch a clip from your film, what as a nugget we can sort of take away and think about as we're watching these films, what's something that you're thinking about now? What are you fixated on in your daily thought around the economy at this moment, or what are you exploring?
I'd say my big obsession is I do think we are at a turning point in our economic history, sort of on the level of moving from an agrarian to an industrial economy, and that, the appification of the economy, Uber and all that, we're still in such an early stages, but it's going to transform our economy dramatically. And I think for one segment of our society, bright, curious, adaptable people, that's going to be really, really good news, and it's going to mean a lot of opportunity. And for others who are maybe don't have the intelligence or don't have the adaptability, or people who want more of a quiet, predictable life, I think it's going to be much, much tougher. And we don't know where the cutoff is. There's a compelling argument that it's sort of 20% of Americans will do much better and 80% will do either the same or worse. Some people say, no, 2% will do better, 98% will do worse. Others say, no, 40% will do better. I don't know anyone who thinks
both
a
of
majority
the first
will.
two you mentioned don't sound too optimistic.
I'd say, to be totally honest, if you're in an app store in Soho, curious about the economy, that's a pretty good sign that you're in the good part. But most of Americans, I think, are in for a tough century.
A tough century,
or several decades. I don't know. However long you can predict, and I think that becomes a political issue. What do we do about that? And it's certainly a crucial economic issue. So.
This is that part of economics that I mentioned earlier about being terrifying. This is that.
That's right.
You start thinking about these things, and it
although in my experience,
daunting.
if you're terrified, you probably shouldn't be terrified, or as terrified. I mean, the very fact of being terrified means you're aware enough and curious enough that you are likelier to adapt. It's the people, and it's a lot of people who don't even know. I mean, I remember being in Alabama in a dying textile town, and talking to this guy whose life has all but collapsed. He had a solid union job, owned his own home, and he was now in economic free fall. And I was asking him basically, how is he adapting? And he said, oh, well, they'll bring those jobs back. They'll figure it out. There's no way they're not going to bring those jobs back. And I just sat there thinking, you should be terrified. My ambitious college-educated friends in New York who are terrified probably don't need to be quite so terrified, but you should be terrified.
Pivoting off of that,
I didn't say that to him, by the way.
Sweet alpacas. Where does that come? Well, actually, you know what? No, let's do this, because it's it's such an easy way into this conversation. Let's just watch. We're going to watch the kind of credit sequence, right? The opening.
You'll watch the opening 30 seconds.
The opening number, and then you'll tell us more about it. So let's take a look at the opening to Sweet Alpacas. Well, needless to say, it doesn't go well for all three of the cute alpacas. Some do better than others, which is what the story you're trying to explore, the issue you're trying to explore, right?
Yeah, so this was, for me, definitely the most fun was Adam McKay, who writes and directs all of Will Ferrell's movies and is legendary comedy writer for Saturday Night Live, head writer for Saturday Night Live for years. He and I have become friends, and I was telling him about this project, and he's like, I want to do one of these movies. And so he and I emailed Morgan and his folks and said, hey, do you want Adam McKay to direct one of these? And you said, absolutely, Adam McKay, that'd be awesome. And so McKay just instantly we were talking about income inequality, and I was basically explaining how there's sort of three levels of income inequality. There's the kind of the Occupy Wall Street stuff, there's the super, super rich, really the 0.1%, 0.01%, that has one dynamic. Then there's the stuff I was talking about, like let's call it the 20%, 80%, and that's a different dynamic. And so he's like, because he's brilliant, he just instantly said, and I think part of it was his daughter was watching, the ponies, My Little Ponies. He's like, what if we do just this magical land, the unbelievably sweet alpacas, where everything's super sweet, but it turns out that each of the alpacas represent one of these, there's one that's 0.1%, one that's 20%, and one that's the 80%, and inequality is sort of thrust into this painful, painful world. And so he and I went back and forth, and part of it was him making it funny and me making it boring. Although I do think, because my wife, Jen Banbury, helped me with it, and I think she wrote many of the funniest lines, in my opinion, although she doesn't get credit for that, except right now. But it was, for me, just such a fun thing. I mean, all the work I do, I try and make it accessible, sometimes funny, engaging, but it's always very literal for NPR or the New York Times. It's always interviewing people and playing tape of those interviews, and so I've never, had the opportunity to like just imagine stuff. And then writing a cartoon is so cool. It's crazy. Like you just come up with an idea and suddenly it's there, someone's drawing it really beautifully. It was so fun. It was awesome.
Congratulations. Well, let's see in the few minutes that we have what questions the audience may have. And I know we have microphones that will be circulated. So there's a gentleman up here, and then you guys can take other questions.
Hi, I'm a documentary filmmaker, so I'm actually very curious about the whole sort of process that went into it. Whether you knew ahead of time, whether you weren't really looking for a return, and that you were going to look for many different distribution, and how did that affect the filmmaking process?
Well, that was the plan from day one. From day one, minute one, we said we're not going to chase money. Because I think you're going about it for the wrong way. If you're for a project like this, and if Paul came in, said, "Listen, I want to get this out there," we had a real conversation of like, whatever return you're going to get is going to be so minimal. You're not going to make millions of dollars on this. The more value is, if it does generate any income, is convincing the people who make that money to give it back to us to put back into making more films. So what's launching right now is there's an educational initiative that's coming out around this. There are teaching tools that are being uploaded to the app that teachers will be able to download, so anyone in the country will be able to utilize this in a classroom setting, junior high, high school, college. And for all of us, and even for the filmmakers involved, the budget on these films was for each film was anywhere between $100,000 and $150,000. Nobody was going to drive off in a Ferrari after making one of these movies unless you made a movie for like $5,000. But everybody came in, saying, "Listen, I want to make the best thing possible." Almost all the money ended up on screens, on the screen for whatever people were doing, and with big A-list filmmakers from like Catherine Hardwicke, who did Twilight, John Chu, who did G.I. Joe, Adam McKay from Anchorman. I mean, these are people who are used to making really big, crazy budget movies that said, "This is such a great exercise and such an important thing. I want to be a part of it." But yeah, from day one, it wasn't about making money. It was about getting them out into the world and chasing as many partners as we could to help us.
What are some of the challenges you faced when you were trying to combine the economic side of what you're trying to portray and then the more creative side when you were making the films?
I think that the economics advisors, there's things that are so important to us that we really, really, really want to explain, but they take a long time. And so the Alpaca script, or every script I worked on, it was this stripping down. What is the essential lesson that we're trying to get across? And what is the clearest version of that? So there's a reason economics is written in a long and boring way with lots and lots of technical language. It's because it's subtle and nuanced, and that's part of what I love about it. And I love, that I've spent a long time trying to learn it and understand it. So it was sometimes very painful to like, okay, I've gotten it completely as simple as it possibly could be, and the creative people coming back and saying, that is way too long and way too boring. So we need to make it more simple. So it was a constant give and take. It was a I'd say overall a very positive process, but there were moments that were kind of agonizing, I have to say.
Hello. Do you think that this kind of content will sort of dictate, I guess, the way maybe other content creators will shift towards educational type of work, or do you think that this is how audiences are now consuming content, like very short form, entertaining, and at the same time educational?
I mean, I think people are consuming content in so many different ways. That's what makes it exciting for content creators. I'm incredibly platform agnostic. We make movies that are 90 minutes long. We make TV shows that are an hour long, that are a half hour long. We create digital content that's anywhere from 3 minutes to 15 minutes. I think that where we live now is an incredible time because we can create content in multiple platforms to fit multiple audiences that give us the ability to actually have multiple business opportunities as filmmakers. And that's what we should strive for. What I strive for is not to, somebody once asked me, as we were having a whole argument about, well, would you rather have an Emmy or an Oscar? And I said, well, I'd rather have a career. I mean, ultimately, I'd much rather continue to tell stories wherever I can tell stories to reach audiences wherever they're consuming content that I can. And that's the exciting thing. So I think you'll still see people who go to movies that'll want to sit and have that experience. You'll see people who will want to have that experience in home with their family where they can watch show into show into show into show, kind of Netflix style. You'll see people who, as much as I still can't imagine doing it, who will watch Gladiator on their phone on a train on the way to work. But that's the world we live in. And I think that you do need to be willing and ready to adapt to that however it is. And there's great opportunities for filmmakers to suddenly make things that are educational, that can be fun, while also making things that are incredibly artistic.
And I would also say, just from my perspective as a journalist, that like NPR, it used to be you do a story and that's it. And no one will ever hear that story again. And now that story can have a digital life forever. And that, for me, and in my field, you see a lot more emphasis on explanatory journalism and journalism that is engaging and exciting for that exact same reason. So maybe we're meeting in the middle somewhere.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, Morgan. You certainly now at this point have a career. We've been talking about the various movies. You and I have been talking, or you've been on this stage multiple times now talking about various moments in that career. When you look at the work that you do you see a connective tissue? Because I certainly do as an observer, between what you do for the big screen versus television now versus we the economy, the small screen or the device. But how do you view it?
Well, I mean, I think that when we made the movie The Greatest Movie Ever Sold, we had a guy, as we were trying to chase brands, who basically broke down what my brand identity is and what I kind of represent. Like our brand is like a smart, playful brand, a mindful, playful brand is the way he describes it, mindful, playful. And I think the goal for all of the content we make lives and breathes within a mindful, playful world. It's stuff that should make you think. It's stuff that should make you laugh. We have a mantra at our company, which is if you can make someone laugh, you can make someone listen. Through humor, you can let people's walls come down. You can get them to engage in a conversation and in content in very different ways. And I think that that is a real running through line. We make pop docs. I really want to make things that are hitting into the vein of popular culture, into kind of popular entertainment, things that don't taste like medicine and can have the ability to kind of breathe beyond kind of a typical viewing audience. And I think that's what we still strive to do with everything we make.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, what are the challenges now that you're creating the shorter content, material? The different challenges that you have to be able to convey the information. What is the mentality that you have to go through? Because you're doing a longer, 1 hour or an hour and a half, documentary. It's a different mindset. So how do you go about that now that you're starting this new venture?
Well, yeah, I mean that's the real thing. Is like it becomes a real challenge for a filmmaker, and that's when we were working with these filmmakers, Ramin Barani and or Jessica Yu, who like the challenge of now making what would normally be a 90-minute topic in 3 to 5 minutes. It's like, wow, how do I tell this story in 3 to 5 minutes? So you have to be incredibly surgical in your approach, surgical in the choices you make, and luckily, Miao and I were able to work with fantastic advisors who kind of helped to shepherd us through that process. But it's those conversations, I think, with the advisors that helped me really hone in on what was important.
Yeah, no, speaking with advisors definitely got me down to the topic of, Chinese manufacturing and the foreign direct investment, because when I got the topic, it was like, how does Chinese economy impact the U.S. economy? That's a humongous topic that could go on for hours, and there's so many different elements, and so that was for sure the biggest challenge. And then, speaking with the advisors, kind of you sort of have to pick something to go with, and then and for me, it was like finding the really great human stories, and there was really human elements that kind of can tell the big story, and then you have little others, side stories that come out of it. But yeah, you really do have to pick something, and hopefully that will tell a greater story through that small one.
Well, as we wrap up, last question for each of you. What's something you're working on now that you can share with us or tell us about? Start with Adam.
I just finished. I had the cover story in the New York Times Magazine this past weekend, which covers a lot of the stuff I talked about, and I'm writing a book on those themes.
What's the book exploring maybe more in depth?
Sort of how the economy has changed, how to succeed in this new and challenging economy.
I imagine you're still writing it. Will it be out next year, or when are you?
Yeah, God knows. Yeah. I have a contract. It's been sold, but yeah.
If people want to, do you have a website or Twitter? How can people stay in touch with sort of what you're doing? Or
sure, New York Times Magazine. I'm going to have a column there. That's a good place. Yeah, or at Adam Davidson.
Okay, very good. Miao?
Yeah, I read his article in the New York Times magazine. It was really great. I've been working on a feature doc for a couple years. That's why it's also so great to do a short. Sometimes it's so nice to do the different length projects. And my feature doc has been following a couple of teenagers that come from China and looking at education and how they adapt here once they arrive here. Yeah.
Yeah, we just announced a new film that we're going to be doing, and we have a digital channel that we're launching in a partnership with Maker that'll come out in January, and the new channel is called Smartish, which is what I am. I'm Smartish, and what we're doing is a lot of original digital content for that. We'll be launching about 5 shows every quarter starting in January. Some are short form, some are like half-hour longs. But they'll be available everywhere, and they'll kind of bridge the gap between TED Talks and reality TV, that Smartish world. Yeah.
Well, in the meantime, invite everybody, if you haven't already, to download the We the Economy app. You can get more information on We the Economy on the website, wetheeconomy.com, and hashtag We the Economy. You can get a lot more information on various social media platforms, including Twitter. So thank you very much to Adam, Miao, and Morgan for being here tonight. Thank you for their time.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you for coming.